Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. In our first of our Leadership Lens Series 2, which is kicking off all about leading under pressure. I'm just waiting for a few more people to join and then we will get started. But I hope everyone's having a lovely day. You can see the numbers ticking up very slowly. So just bear with us another 20 seconds or so and then we'll get moving. I think it's a really interesting topic today as well. I don't know if anyone was able to join the January webinar, which was all about resilience and how to maintain your own resilience during difficult times. On this particular session, leading under pressure is a build on that. So really looking at how we can lead others through difficult times under stress and pressure. I think it's a really important topic today. It's quite a hot topic because most of the leaders that are operating today, including ourselves, they're operating under sustained pressure. It's not letting up, and I don't think it's going to let up anytime soon. So it's a really important thing to be talking about because it's really important for leaders to understand how pressure changes our thinking, how it affects the way we lead, and also how we continue to create clarity and stability for others when things are feeling uncertain, when we're feeling that stress and pressure. So I'll get started. As we've got a few people joining, they might be joining after, but I'll get started now. And kind of over the next sort of 20, 30 minutes, I really just want to share some practical ideas and some reflections that hopefully feel useful and realistic in the environments that many of us are leading in today. For those of you that don't know me, that haven't joined one of our sessions before, I am Elle Robinson. I'm chartered occupational psychologist and CEO of Hanover Leadership Solutions, and I've spent the last 20 plus years working with leaders across different sectors, industries, geographies, supporting them to lead more effectively through assessment, leadership development, and coaching. We will have a bit of time at the end for Q&A, but the chat function is live. So if you've got any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop them in the chat function as we go. And just to check that's working as well, my very first thing that I want to just bring up is just a quick question. I thought I'd start with a bit of a reflection. So if we think about pressure and the pressure that we experience today, what tends to suffer first? And this might be from your own personal perspective. It might be decision making that gets impacted, patience, strategic thinking, communication, energy, or focus that gets impacted when we're feeling that pressure. It might be from things that you've experienced or seen elsewhere. But if you put your thoughts into the chat, it'd be good just to hear what you think really kind of impacts pressure first, or how pressure impacts people first. Patience, yeah, I see that. Talk to leaders about having more patience when we're under stress and pressure. That does come up quite a bit. Communication, yes, absolutely. Yep, a couple of that. Can I add time? Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, I have to admit, there's a number of people, including myself, that have said, can we just create another day in the week so we can get more things done? So if we could, that would be amazing. But no, thank you for adding those in. Communication, patience, more time. And there's no right or wrong answers to this. I think it's really interesting because pressure affects all of us differently. So we've all got different lived experiences, different personalities. And so it might be decision making for some, it might be communication, it might be the patience. For some people, when they feel that pressure, it can create more urgency, more speed. For others, it impacts how we communicate. We can become a bit more direct. We might withdraw. There's different ways that we respond to those situations. For others, it can affect how we respond emotionally as well. And quite often, what happens is we don't notice that these behaviours are coming out until after the fact, because hindsight's wonderful, isn't it? Yes, communication, thinking, inertia, these are things that are popping up. This isn't what I've got on here is not an exhaustive list. There's other things as well. But thank you for that. One of the reasons that the topic of stress, pressure, resilience, leading under pressure feels particularly relevant now is because many leaders are not actually dealing with short bursts of pressure anymore. What used to happen is that pressure would come in waves and we'd have time to recuperate. But now that pressure, as I said, it's not letting up. It's the water that we're constantly swimming in. We're surrounded by it. So every day, leaders are dealing with that sustained pressure. It's coming from all directions. They're also dealing with competing priorities, differing agendas. How do they manage that? Juggling lots of plates. Constant change is always around. We've all heard the phrase that nothing's constant except change. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Ambiguity, lots of leaders have to deal with ambiguity, uncertainty, but also complexity. There's a lot of complex scenarios out there. The world around us is very complex, but also the decisions that we make are getting more and more complex, and we're having more and more decisions to make. And that leads, if we're going to have to keep doing that, to decision fatigue, particularly if we're holding on to all the decisions ourselves. And if you're pulling all of this together, we've got all of this pressure building, all of these different things that we have to think about as leaders, that increases the emotional load for us. So rather than the leadership challenge being focused on, can I actually handle the pressure I'm experiencing right now? It's not about handling, it's more about thinking from a different perspective when we're thinking about leading through pressure, about how we handle this. It's more about, how do I continue to lead effectively while this constant sustained pressure is going on? Because what's interesting, and we see it as well as leaders, that pressure can change how we think and behave. And sometimes it can do it very quickly and we can notice it. But if we are undergoing sustained pressure, if it's happening all the time, over that time, the pressure can change how we think and behave. And it can be even harder to spot if it's happening over a slow period, long period of time. But what actually happens to our behavior when we are under stress or pressure? So as humans, we are naturally attuned to scan for threats every few seconds. It is part of how we're wired. And pressure is really interesting because many leaders, and in fact, not many, lots of leaders that I talk to, and I throw myself into this pot as well, they often feel they perform well when the pressure is on. They kind of like some of that pressure. They enjoy the pace, the challenge, the energy that comes with managing multiple priorities, juggling lots of balls, looming deadlines. But what we know for a fact is that everyone has a tipping point. And I like to think about it as a bucket filling with water. And the water represents the pressure and the stress as it's building, as our bucket is filling up. And everyone has a different bucket size. We can all absorb different amounts of pressure, but eventually there comes a point where the water starts to overflow, when it starts to tip over the edge. Now, some leaders are really good at spotting that pressure building early. And because they can spot that, they can create release valves. So I like to think about poking holes in the bucket so the water comes out. But if you're under that sustained pressure for too long, as I said, it does become harder to spot that pressure building. And when that pressure builds, what naturally happens to us is that our perspective begins to narrow and our judgment starts to get affected. What then happens is that leaders can become much more reactive, more operational, more focused on immediate issues, while losing some of that ability, and in some cases, all of the ability to step back and to think strategically and look more broadly, because we just get stuck in doing the do and trying to get things done. Urgency can start to replace judgment. So everything can begin to feel equally important, which can create confusion, not just for yourself as a leader, but also the team around you if they don't know what to prioritize on. Pressure can also increase the amount of control that we have. So some people are like that control, but under that pressure, they might want to hold on to more decisions. They might want to hold on to more of the operations and increase that it increases to over control and micromanagement in some cases as well. And unintentionally, if that happens, leaders can become the bottleneck. Also quite interesting is that emotionally, pressure is contagious, and emotions themselves are contagious. And as leaders, we are responsible for creating the climate that teams operate in. And teams absorb uncertainty, tension, anxiety far more quickly and far more often than we realize. And so it's really important that we're aware of that and we can create the right climate for them. Communication can also become less clear. less consistent, which can cause the teams around you, the people that you work with, to lose focus and to lose confidence. But what I find really interesting when we look at all of these is that I like to call them leadership traps, but these traps that we can experience under pressure are actually all very predictable. And that's why self-awareness matters so much. And you might be familiar with the copious amounts of personality questionnaires that are out there, and some of them, like the Hogan, the Luminous Spark, really looking at how you operate under stress and pressure, and recognizing that and understanding how you might operate under stress and pressure is really important. It helps us to predict these things, because the earlier that we can recognize when our judgment is narrowing, when our perspective is shrinking, the more choice we then have in how we respond. We're then able to think more intentionally about how we can lead others through those difficult periods. So when you're aware of the pressure around you and how you react in any given situation, what's really important when we're thinking about leading under pressure is, what does your team actually need most from you? And it is a really interesting question, because I talk to a lot of leaders about pressure and stress and resilience. And what they often think is that they need to have all the answers during these tough times. They need to be perfect, for want of a better phrase, but teams rarely actually want or expect their leaders to be perfect. And research tells us, and I've got some really clear, very short messages on here. Research tells us that what teams really need when they're under that cosh, when they're under stress and pressure, is clarity, and that's of messages, of the purpose, the vision, the why. They need to know what that direction of travel is. You need to anchor it into something that, like the purpose, the why for people. Decisions, clarity of decisions. So who's going to make that decision? By when? Who's got the accountability, the responsibility for it? That's really important for teams. And also priorities, because it can get very confusing if there's lots going on. So for teams to be able to focus and continue to operate effectively, understanding and knowing what those core priorities are that they need to focus their attention on is really important. And with that comes consistency of messages and behavior from their leaders. You've got to do what you say you'll do. It builds reliability, it builds trust, and those messages need to align with each other as well. And visibility is really important for teams. They want to know that their leaders are there, that they're able to reach out to them when they need to, that they've got their back. And what I see quite a lot when I am working with leaders, and I look at personality profiles as well, is that leaders can withdraw just when their teams need them the most. So it's important that you can stay present, and it's a really important piece to think about in the hybrid environment that we operate in, because it's quite easy, if you are leading your team remotely, to not connect, to not reach out over Teams or over Zoom or however you do that. So it's you've got to kind of do this more, especially if you're in a hybrid environment and leading a remote team. The other thing that teams are often asking for is calmness, and maintaining a calm and composed style during tough times can really help others to maintain their own resilience. And the last thing on here is this realistic optimism, realistic reassurance, even if it's really hard to see a way through. And what I mean by that is, it's not thinking, oh, everything's going to be wonderful and fantastic. It's adding that grounded, down-to-earth, realistic lens on it. So resilient leaders are really good at acknowledging the tough times. Things are really uncertain. It's really hard right now, but they're also able to help people see the light at the end of the tunnel. They're able to help them see there is a passageway through to the end of this. And that really helps create a good climate, and to help maintain resilience for the team as well. So just a quick question as well. I think, if all of those on that list are what teams need, what role does the leader really play in helping them maintain clarity? And I think this is one of the most important leadership skills to have when operating under stress. And that often starts with slowing down before you react, because we naturally react emotionally 5 times faster than our actual brain. So we need time to pause. It needs time to kick in. And that's an important question. So just out of curiosity, if you wanted to put any thoughts into the chat, what really kind of what pulls you into more of a reactive leadership style? And what causes you to feel stress and pressure so that your decision making, your patience, your communication might be impacted? It'd be really interesting to think about that. I think for me, when I think about what causes me stress and pressure, when I get into more of a reactive mode, it is, and I'm quite guilty of this, that I do say yes to quite a lot of things. I know I need to push back a little bit more, but I say yes to too many things, and there are too many plates spinning, too many balls to juggle, particularly if I'm trying to juggle home life and work life. And I can feel it physically as the pressure grows. I'm quite aware of that, which is good given what I do. But also, I can materially, I have a to-do list. And if that to-do list keeps growing and gets longer and longer, I know something's going to have to give at some point. So yes, that pulls me into that reactive leadership, and I have to take that moment to pause and think, actually, what do I need to do differently here? We had a few more comments on the what suffers first as we were talking. Visibility, empathy are also key. That's kind of popping out for leaders as well, and things that we're talking about. But ad hoc tasks and meetings, they can cause pressure. Meetings and meetings for the sake of meeting. I was literally just thinking that the amount of pre-meetings in my diary is ridiculous. When you have those back-to-back meetings as well, and you've got no time to stop and think, which is why a lot of people recommend let's do a 50-minute meeting instead of an hour-long meeting. That gives us 10 minutes to then just reset, maybe grab a cup of coffee. That doesn't always happen. And when you sit in a meeting and have a day of back-to-back meetings, I know I feel exhausted by the end of that. So I'm sure others do as well. But I think that can really cause a lot of stress and pressure. Meetings without a decision to the end, spiraling into more meetings. There's a common theme here. Meetings and meetings. And I don't know if you find as well, if you have back-to-back meetings, by the end of the day, you've not actually got anything done because you've just been in meetings all day. And then there's actions to follow up after all those meetings. So more and more and more pressure. It's kind of circular, isn't it? But do feel free to continue to add into that. But there's definitely a theme around meetings coming through. I think it's important to be thinking about what are the things that pull us into that reactive leadership mode. But also I wanted to share something with you that might help pull us out of that mode. It's a really simple framework called the PRESS framework. And it's kind of helping you think about, well, I do need to take a moment to pause because that can help pull me out of that reactive style and can help me to create clarity for me and also for my team. And the PRESS framework, the PRESS model is that pause, refocus, enable, stabilize, and sustain. Sorry. And yes, we had another comment as well in the chat around kind of lack of clear objectives and goals. And this is kind of key. Thank you for that, to the clarity piece that we're talking about at the moment. And if I just explain a little bit more about each of these buttons, no pun intended, given its press. P is pause before reacting. So creating that thinking space. So counting to 10, counting backwards from 5, taking a breath. We've probably heard all of these suggestions. We all probably do something similar or one of those, but as we're all different things will work for different people. But it's important that you know what you need to do in order to pause and do what works for you. I used to do the counting to 10, then I started the counting backwards from 5. Now I just go grab a cup of coffee. It's different for everyone and it changes as well. The refocus is about priorities. So refocusing on your priorities, thinking about what matters most right now. And that helps if there's lack of clear objectives and goals as well. Separate urgency from importance. And re-anchor your actions, re-anchor your plans, your decisions to the critical priorities, to the why. Why are we doing this? What are we really trying to achieve? Enabling others is the E. So to avoid becoming the bottleneck, and you really need to enable others. You need to empower others to make those decisions, because what you don't want is to be that bottleneck. You don't want that decision overload. You don't want to run into decision fatigue, because that will all narrow your judgment and your perspective and how you're operating with others. Also, if you're empowering others and enabling them to make decisions, it helps to engage them more and keep them bought in and coming along with you during these difficult times. Stabilize is about the environment, so creating the rhythm. The last one is about sustaining your energy. Remember to take care of yourself. We can all be very guilty of not doing that. I know that myself. But just remember that the goal itself isn't perfection. Teams aren't asking for perfection, but it is about remaining effective under pressure so that you can lead others effectively. So let's just think about that last S for a moment, just to expand on that sustain, as it is really important, because you can't lead your team successfully if you're not fully charged. So one thing I think leaders often underestimate is the impact pressure has on cognitive bandwidth, because when you're depleted, when your battery is running low, your judgment can narrow. So managing your energy becomes really important. And you may have all heard of the oxygen mask analogy. If you're on a plane, the mask drop down, put your mask on first so you can breathe before you can help anyone else. And it's the same with leaders. If your judgment is narrowing because you're not taking care of yourself, if your battery is running low, you can't effectively lead other people through difficult. You can't help them to maintain their own resilience. So to do that, it might mean thinking about how you protect your time, how you really kind of carve time out to be focusing on the things you need to be focusing on. It might be about creating boundaries between your work and your home time. When do you switch off? When do you switch on? Digital boundaries. I know I use that personally. I have a work phone and a home phone, very, very separate, so that I'm not tempted at certain times to start looking at emails. But also reducing that unnecessary noise around us and also our teams, because there's always so much going on around us. And it might be around that. It might be linking to protecting thinking time, taking yourself away from certain situations or meetings or the screen so that you can think as you need to. But it also might be about building recovery time in for yourself. So how do you really like to relax? What brings you joy? Hi everyone, apologies, right on the cliffhanger. My internet decided it wanted to drop out. So let me just share my slide with you and I can tell you the last little bits. I know it's super important. Bear with me. I cannot find my slides now. It's always a great one, isn't it? Hopefully that will be bringing the slides back up. We're talking about stability. Great. So just to refresh really quickly, we were talking about kind of managing your own energy and managing your time, because it's super important that you are able to be able to think effectively so you can lead your teams through difficult times. But how do you create that stability? Because it's another really important piece of the puzzle. So that's the second S in the press framework, because when leaders become more reactive, they're more unclear, they're emotionally overloaded. This can be when instability and uncertainty in teams can really resonate, and they'll feel that really quickly. As I said before, it's really contagious. They can absorb these things really quickly, and in turn, it will impact their performance, morale, and engagement. And as I said, leaders create the environment that others operate in. It's particularly noticeable during periods of pressure and uncertainty. And that means that this is one of the most important leadership responsibilities under pressure, creating that stability for others so that they can continue performing effectively. And what you'll notice on this screen, on this slide, is that stability requires communication, clarity, visibility, optimism, all of the things that the teams ask for when they're under pressure. But interestingly, and because when it comes to that communication piece, what we find sometimes is that leaders are communicating less at exactly the time when people need it more. But stability and creating that environment needs that communication. It needs leaders that will help people understand what those priorities are and what isn't priority as well. So being really clear about that consistent messaging, so regular communications, alignment in what's being said, that visible leadership is really important. As I said, don't withdraw. Some are quite naturally inclined to withdraw, but some also withdraw even when they think there's nothing to say. And sometimes, an honest acknowledgement, I can't say the word, that there isn't any more information or that things are uncertain, and that these are just tough times, can actually help create that stability. Just knowing as a team that your leader's talking to you as much as possible, and that you as a leader are going to communicate what you can when you can really help them to feel that stable and safe so that they can continue to do what they need to do. And it's important as leaders that you remember you don't need to have all the answers, but the teams need clarity and they need that stability so that they can continue to operate. So I'm going to leave you with a quick reflection to consider after the session, and do feel free if you want to put it into the chat function. But if you think about the press framework, what is one small shift that you can make this week? What's one small thing that you could do differently that might help the team around you feel a bit more resilient, feel a bit more clarity around what they need to achieve? Because often those very small behavior changes can create a much bigger leadership impact than we often think, if you think about the butterfly effect. And then the final takeaways, I appreciate because of the technical issue, we're bang on half past. Just a couple of final takeaways to leave you with. Leading under pressure is not about having all the answers. It's not about never feeling stressed, because we all feel stressed at some point. It's not about always trying to be in control. It is about clarity. It's about protecting your own and others' judgment and creating that stability, because if you get all of those three, it really helps to keep people resilient and to help them perform well under pressure. The ultimate goal is not to remove pressure as a leader. We can't. It's not within our gift to remove all the pressure that people feel or that even we feel. But it is in our gift to lead effectively through it. And hopefully some of the takeaways that you've heard and the practical ideas that you've heard in this session have given you some food for thought of things that you could do differently going forward. So if anyone has any questions, do feel free to stay on and drop them in the chat. Or you can always email me and connect with me afterwards. I'm very happy to have a follow-up conversation to answer any questions you might have. But thank you to anyone that needs to disappear now. And thank you for kind of pausing with me while we dropped our internet. It's always the way, isn't it? Excellent. Yeah. Share more of those meetings. Thank you, Rosie. More enablement. Great. And as we close up, there was one question that was asked of me when I was talking to some leaders about this particular topic a while ago. And they said, well, what if pressure is genuinely relentless? If it's not actually ever going to get up, what if there's no time to pause? And I mean, it's a really good question. And it's one that I'd love to spend just a second to answer before we close down the session. I think that if it doesn't feel like that it's ever going to let up, that's exactly when leaders are most needed to create small moments of pause, not only for yourself, but also for the teams, for those in your team. It doesn't necessarily mean stopping for hours to reflect. Sometimes it's just simply slowing things down by a few minutes, by those 60 to 90-second micro rests, just rechecking priorities, really asking clear questions before you make decisions. Those small pauses can improve judgment significantly under pressure. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. You've got my details here. Please, it would be great to see you at our next webinar on the 18th of June, the illusion of alignment. Watch out for the links coming through on those and posts on LinkedIn. We will be putting this onto our Hanover YouTube site. So if you wanted to reflect or pass the link around to anyone else, this will be available for the next 30 days. But it has been really great joining you, you joining me. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you, everyone.